When I left school, I went to university to maybe sort of become a teacher or something, because that's what I knew to do. But there was an intervention, and that is the Beatles. You know, they went to Rishikesh and started talking about meditation, and so I picked up and said, to hell with this, I'm going to India. And I went to India. And I was like 19. First I went to London, I saw Jimi Hendrix in London, and I saw the whole scene of the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and T-Rex. Extraordinary people, you know, and was informed by that, and then went to India and wandered around India, all over India, and met all kinds of yogis, known and unknown yogis and famous gurus, and some hoax gurus and some genuine gurus.
What year was that?
It was like 71. And then in 73, after wandering around India, I went to Tiruvannamalai, the ashram of Ramana Maharishi, and there met students of Desikachara and Krishnamacharya, and they were sincere people going to, you know, on pilgrimage to Ramana ashram. And I was there, being sincere as I could, and they just told me about yoga because they hadn't had much success in finding yoga teaching. And in fact, I'd run away from a few yoga teachers who I thought were pompous, arrogant fools, you know, that I'd studied with who had ashrams, and it was disappointing for me. And so I came there and started studying with Desikachara and Krishnamacharya, and it was like, oh my goodness, it was like informed Indian spirituality, you know, informed, reliable teachings on yoga.
Where was that, in Chennai?
In Chennai, yeah. But Krishnamacharya had been here, but when the Maharaj system collapsed, that political system, he didn't have a job. Which is one thing, you know, he came here to his yogashala one day and there was padlocks on the door. You know, it's a very upsetting thing for him in his, you might say, life mission to be thrown out of his own teaching circumstance and the ending of patronage that he had. And he had to go to Madras to make a living as a humble yoga teacher, you know, teaching private students and so forth. So I arrived there, and having been wandering around India for quite a year and a half or more, finding all kinds of extraordinary things, but there was no one explaining to me about how to respond, you know, efficiently and successfully to all the different gurus and powers. And there's an extraordinary country, this country. Full of charlatans and full of beauty also. And it's hard to sift out, you know, and it was hard for me as a young man to know how to respond appropriately for me, you know, to the powerful influences that had come in my life. So I responded well to their academic teachings of yoga. And I even wanted to go and, you know, had some time with Muktananda up in near Mumbai, and I wanted to go, and I could see how they were completely needed to make use of that empowerment that was coming through that line of teachers, and that, you know, that vast Siddha tradition. That, I mean, the whole thing is a mess now. And I'd say it's a mess because there's no yoga in it. There's no teaching on actual yoga, how to conduct the life current through your own body, how to conduct it with the yoga that's needed to respond to such an influence. But it's the same as saying to a Christian, you know, you need yoga to respond to what the blessings that you have on you. And the yoga of sexuality too, of course. You know, there must be an intelligent response in life to that great force, which is the force of life itself. and there's none. It's hidden, it's taken away, and in all of it, it's just a mess. And wherever you have a power structure and some kind of like powerful spiritual transmission, but you're not teaching yoga and sexuality, the whole thing turns into a mess. In every single case, we could go through a long list. And so that sort of became my commitment to teach my own friends, my people that I knew in that particular group, and then to the rest of the world. And I just got momentum in it. I was visiting Desikachar, and I went to the US, and I said, "Sir, do you realize what's going on? Do you realize what they're doing, calling yoga? And your father's teaching is not there at all. It's not represented at all." And I said, "We have to do something about it." And he said, "Well, please, if you could, please do something." I said, "Well, at least there has to be a book explaining your father's teaching, because there's a lot in it, and the world doesn't have it. What they have is this gymnastics that they're calling yoga." So I got to work. In terms of what I discovered as a young person in spiritual pursuit in this world and in India, what I discovered with Krishnamacharya and Desikachar, to me, was absolute pure gold for humanity. And I saw that it had been lost in the haystack. So needles of gold had been lost in the haystack. And I felt just a urgency, just so important to get down and hold it, because I didn't feel that Krishnamacharya and Desikachar necessarily had the skills, the worldly skills to do it. They weren't marketed, they weren't like that. They were sincere scholars, you might say, and yogis, and they had the limits of their own society on them. And then they had the limits of all the appropriation of yoga that happened in the US, and all of that went on, and it was all a bit too much for Desikachar. Where he felt that his father, I told you that his father hadn't seen the results of his own work, and Krishnamacharya was also very upset with the way his work had been associated with, the popularization of yoga, and that he had been ignored in that and that success of the brands of yoga. And so he had a lot of disappointment in him. So that when The Heart of Yoga was published in the US in 1995, I was up there. So that book, The Heart of Yoga, was my calling card to the world. And I started teaching in LA and New York and all over the place. And I was saying, this is what we need in yoga. But by that time, the gymnastic brands, the branding of yoga as extreme, exaggerated body shapes had been branded as that is what yoga is. And it had all taken off as, a billion-dollar industry, 17 million Americans spending $1,000 a year on yoga by the time I got to the US. So it was big business. And there was a small voice in the midst of that. So it was a lot to try to do. But I gave it a go.